almost 20 years ago, a law was passed in the United States whose purpose it is to let certain people get away with murder and debilitating injury. And this law, not surprisingly, is not well known. Because if it were, it stands to reason that it wouldn't exist anymore. I hope so, at least. I have James Roguski here. He's organizing a grassroots effort to get rid of this horrific law. Welcome, James.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor and a privilege, and I look forward to a good discussion.
All right. Well, let's delve in. What is that bill?
Well, it's known as the Public Readiness and Preparation, or PrEP Act. And as you mentioned, almost 20 years ago, it was signed into law by President George W. Bush on December 30th, 2005. If you go looking for it, strangely enough, the name of the bill says it's 2006. So almost 20 years ago, they tacked on to the end of a military appropriations bill and Katrina relief, this liability protection. And so the point that I think most people need to get about the PrEP Act is it's not really about preparing us for anything. That acronym kind of confuses people. The first line of the bill, and I have it here, and we're going to obviously talk a little bit more about the details. The first line of the bill.
Oh, yeah. And James, I can show it while you're reading it. So for those of, let me just share my screen. Sure. For those of our listeners who actually watch it, because I find it very helpful, especially when it comes to law and legalese, to see it written.
The very first line pretty much says it all. It's for targeted. Oh, you went down too far.
I went down to. Oh, here we go.
Very first line. Targeted liability protections. That's all you need to know, really. Okay, for pandemic and epidemic products and security countermeasures. Now, they changed the name of pandemic and epidemic products, which are drugs and devices and what they call biologicals. Most people refer to those as vaccines, and call them covered countermeasures. This act gives the Secretary of Health and Human Services enormous power to protect people from any kind of lawsuit or liability. Persons, people and corporations are protected from any kind of lawsuit or liability so long as they do as they are instructed. As long as they listen to what the Secretary of Health and Human Services says are the products to be used, then if any harm comes from that, they cannot be sued for civil damages. Now, it goes
James, I have a quick question. You said that the name was changed to covered countermeasures.
Well, in the top there, it talks about pandemic and epidemic products. Well, they don't legally define pandemic. They don't legally define epidemic products. They refer to them as covered countermeasures.
So are these the same as the security countermeasures that they have in here in the title?
Well, the security countermeasures is a whole nother rabbit hole. That comes from the Biosecurity Act. And so covered countermeasures is a word that does not include natural products like vitamins and minerals or herbs or anything like that. None of those things are even remotely considered as being beneficial if the Secretary of Health and Human Services, simply because they want to, declares by submitting his declaration into the Federal Register, the record-keeping system of the United States, that he has declared that there might be an emergency, maybe not now, maybe in the future. And he says, well, these are the covered countermeasures for this ailment. And so long as the covered persons, hospitals, doctors, pharmacists, nurses, clinics, whatever it may be, as well as pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors and so forth, as long as they administer the products that he or she has determined are to be covered, it's almost impossible to sue in a civil court case for any kind of damages.
Okay. And a quick question here. So with the covered countermeasures, since they are no longer using this pandemic and epidemic products apparently and substituted it with covered countermeasures, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is it still true then that covered countermeasures stand for pandemic and epidemic products?
Essentially, it's the same thing. And the problem with all of this language is what people think of as regular English words. The legal meaning is very precise. So if you scroll down a little bit, we'll talk about whatever we have there. It leads right out with the liability protections and the scope of claims that are essentially prohibited are for any kind of loss. Okay, death, physical, mental, and emotional injury, illness, disability, or condition. Now, here's one that is going to make people have to think a little bit. The fear of physical, mental, or emotional injury, illness, disability, or condition. Now, just think about that for a minute, right? That's essentially saying that they can terrorize people and you can't sue them for the fear that they induce. I mean,
yes,
we could talk for days. We could talk for days just about that.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. The fear of physical, mental, or emotional injury. So they thought about what kind of emotional state the population would be in, and said, well, even liability there's way of freedom of liability for this. It's very, very strange.
We could talk for days just about the terrorism aspect of how the media has, coerced people. And then fourth on the list is loss or damage to
loss of or damage to property. So because you have to shut down your business and
if you were out of work,
lose your job, right?
If a person was administered one of these countermeasures and they were in the hospital for a long period of time, or suffered and they lost their job or couldn't maintain their business or whatever it might be, it pretty much covers anything that you might imagine. It's not just for death and illness, but for the financial loss as well. This is saying that if I'll use an example, and this is not just COVID. So let me use this example. Say somebody went on vacation to the Caribbean and they came back to, somewhere in the United States and they weren't feeling well. They went to the hospital or the doctor or clinic or urgent care or something like that. And they did a test and they said, oh, you contracted Zika. Well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. If the test says that they did and it's diagnosed as Zika, Zika is one of the 9 PrEP Act declarations that are currently active in the United States. And there are countermeasures and covered persons, hospital personnel, whatever, that so long as they do what is recommended by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, it doesn't mean that they're FDA approved treatments. It doesn't mean that they're EUA, authorized. It could be experimental. It's whatever he says, right? There's no need for clinical trials or studies or follow up afterwards to make sure that, it's actually benefiting the person. If the countermeasure causes any kind of harm, if the drug or whatever treatment they do causes any kind of harm, and if they also treat the side effects of the countermeasure with anything else, whatever they do, so long as it's under the guidelines of the declaration for, in this case, Zika, there's no civil lawsuit that can be brought, unless you meet unbelievably high criteria.
Yeah, and we'll go into that, but I want to interject because you said just a minute ago that there are 9, I think it's 9 diseases for which the
I
PrEP.
wouldn't say diseases. There are 9 PrEP Act declarations, and I'll be
Yes,
happy
so
to go.
there are 9 PrEP Act. So first of all, the PrEP Act has to be declared. It's there. There's this PrEP Act thing, but it has to be declared to become effective for a specific, well,
Issue. Just say issue. And let me
fine,
list them.
for
And
a
it'll
specific
be
issue. And one of these issues is COVID-19. Another issue is Marburg or Zika or all sorts of other things. And in total, there are 9, correct?
right.
Right now that
And
are
I'll
active.
read them off. I'll read them
And
off, and so
yeah,
you can.
but what, because that was when I first learned about the PrEP Act, that wasn't clear to me that it has to be declared for every single issue, and
Mhm.
that it is declared for a specific amount of time. So, for example, for SARS-CoV-2, so COVID-19, it was renewed, I think, in December 2024 until 2029. And
Mhm.
some of the others, I think, expire in 2027, but of course they can be renewed. So that's important. Now, all these issues, are they
Mhm.
all, as far as you know, to your best knowledge, have they all been turned into issues because of gain of function research?
No, I wouldn't. That's a whole nother can of worms. Okay, and so, but you raise a very important question that a lot of people have, and the language again is very important. So the PrEP Act is law. You can read the 20-page document. You've pulled it up. We'll go into it a little bit more in detail. The PrEP Act is a law since December 30th, 2005. That empowers the Secretary of Health and Human Services to make a declaration. And literally, it's just they have somebody write up a document, they submit it into the Federal Register. He's made a declaration, and it changes the scope of how everybody behaves.
So he basically
Now,
just writes one sentence: I declare the PrEP Act for such and such issue.
it's
Is
it's
that
usually
it?
page after page of boring information because it goes into great detail. Now, specifically with COVID, in early 2020, Secretary of Health and Human Services at the time, Alex Azar, made the initial COVID-19 PrEP Act declaration. But then they also have the ability to amend the declaration. Things change, right? Situation changes. And as new products become available or new issues crop up or new people are involved as covered persons, there has been amendment after amendment after amendment after
So
amendment.
what are these amendments? So what's being amended?
One example, which I think was horrible, was early on, they essentially said children are in lockdown, so they're not going to their pediatrician and getting their scheduled vaccines. And so they then covered from any kind of liability people who injected children with not the COVID vaccine, this was 2020, but with any of the childhood vaccines. And you just go, wait a minute,
What?
that is just an enormous, expansion. This is not about COVID. But here's the point, and you might want to pull this up on the page, and we'll talk about the PrEP Act, because this leads into the one thing that struck me years ago when I read in Section B, number 7 in the PrEP Act. I can still remember the feeling of my jaw hanging open when I read the section that we're going to talk about. Hopefully, you can find it. Right. And so I was, a number of years ago, looking through a law website, and I started reading the PrEP Act. And when I read this particular section, I just was dumbfounded. And I think everyone should realize, okay, if you scroll down to Section B,
Section B scope, this
number
one here?
7, keep going down to number 7.
Okay, here's the declaration by the secretary, by the way, saying that the secretary makes a determination. But I would think that the secretary cannot do it against the president's will. What do you think?
Well, he could do it, but then he would face the
He would
consequences.
probably be fired. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
but
He can do it. And yeah. But let's go further down. Here we go. Judicial review.
number 7, right?
Mhm.
when I read this, I was dumbfounded. No court in the United States or of any state shall have subject matter jurisdiction to review any action by the secretary.
What does that mean by mandamus?
That's a writ that you give to the court to have the court intercede.
Okay.
No court can question the declarations made by the secretary.
So that's tyranny. I mean, that's just
tyranny.
plain words. That's just tyranny. The Secretary of HHS as the tyrant above the law of the United States.
This one sentence, violates the, three branches of government, separation of power. It gives all authority to one unelected, cabinet minister, and it takes away the First Amendment right to petition your government for redress of grievances, because you can't go to any court. And so this should infuriate anybody who thinks that the Constitution should not be violated in such an obvious and ridiculous manner. And so when you realize that at the start of COVID, a declaration was made, okay, there's an emergency, and here's the people that cannot be brought into court, and here are the products and devices and such, that it's not a mandate. I want to make sure people really understand this. It's not a mandate that they have to do these things.
Right. But if you do get it somehow, then there's no liability. And the declaration came really early, right? It came in February 2020. Is that correct?
Early 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was, amendment after amendment after amendment. And you mentioned the last 12th amendment that was made by Javier Becerra, December of 2024, extending the liability protection to December 31st.
Oh, I see. So that's also an amendment, just extending it as an amendment. But you said there was a really shocking amendment. You said that because of everything closed down during COVID, doctors' offices were closed for usual business. So kids couldn't go get their routine vaccines on schedule. And then you said because of that, there was an amendment to the declaration for COVID-19 saying that all the vaccines that children somehow get are now falling under the PrEP Act. And that logically, it doesn't make any sense, because if they can't go to the doctor to get their vaccines, where are they going to get their vaccines? First of all, and second of all, why should that mean that these vaccines all of a sudden are now falling under the PrEP Act? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It makes sense if you're trying to cover everybody's butt, okay, and inflict harm upon people and make it so that there's no recourse in civil court.
So are they saying that other vaccines are harmful too?
Well, they'll never say that.
Right, but okay? It seems to say exactly that, right?
Right. And so the issue that we're dealing with is, and you mentioned it right off, is tyranny. Now, their original reason for this, if we can go back a little bit and chat about how this all came to be, if you can rewind, the chronology in your mind and go back to 9/11. Okay. After 9/11, people were basically in shock. They were fearful. And then the anthrax attacks happened. And that's a whole nother can of worms to talk about.
Yes. And I just want to interject here that was actually traced back to Fort Detrick, right? To the anthrax. It was a particular strand of the anthrax. That a very, very toxic strand of anthrax that was only being manufactured by the military at Fort Detrick in Maryland.
And then you go fast forward to the Iraqi war and Colin Powell speaking in front of the United Nations, holding up some vial of something, telling people that, there's weapons of mass destruction, chemical and biological weapons. Be afraid, be very afraid. And so fast forward a little bit to 2005, and there was a Defense Department appropriations bill for the Iraqi war. But in 2005 was Hurricane Katrina that hit New Orleans, and the Bush administration did a horrible job of responding to that. And so Congress was putting together legislation combining Defense Department appropriations and relief for the victims of Hurricane Katrina. Get to the week before Christmas in 2005. They had a Senate bill and they had a House bill, and there were differences. So they had a committee meeting, to iron out the differences. Late into the night, they thought they had an agreement. They go to sleep, they wake up in the morning, and they find that at the end of what they thought they were going to be voting on, somebody had tacked on the PrEP Act. And interestingly enough, 4 prominent Democrats, the late House Representative John Conyers, and the late Senator Ted Edward Kennedy, and at the time, Senator Joe Biden and Senator Hillary Clinton spoke up in the Senate and said, hey, wait a minute. We thought we had an agreement. What's this PrEP Act doing at the end of this bill? It's unconstitutional. It's not anything that we've agreed upon. They tried to get it taken out of the bill, but that attempt failed. And so they all ended up voting for it. And this is how our really messed up, system works. You have a piece of legislation that if you vote against it, oh, you're such a horrible person. How are you voting against relief for Katrina victims? But there's this poison pill added in that goes along for the right.
Of course, it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be, but that's what you do. That's how you blackmail people to vote for something that they are completely opposed to, and it should be outlawed, in my opinion. It's absolutely a terrible way to pass bills. And
So,
but of course, but I wanted to ask you something. So first of all, you said they sneaked it in the middle of the night, and people woke up the next morning and said, "Hey, what's going on? There's something was added. What is that?" How often does that happen?
Well, the most famous one, you go back to just before Christmas, I believe it was 1913, and the Federal Reserve, kind of got put in that same regard.
Oh,
It
really? The
happens more.
Federal Reserve got in that same way? I didn't know
Well,
that.
they do it late at night.
So there's a long tradition of doing it. So that
Right.
okay.
Now, a month and a half after that, in the middle of February 2006, Senator Edward Kennedy submitted a bill to repeal the PrEP Act that was only a month and a half old. And in that legislation, it made it clear what the original intent really was all about. This was all about the response to biological warfare. And the original thinking was, if there's some biological, weapons that are used maybe in Iraq or wherever, and our military and medical personnel have to go into harm's way, the government needs to have whatever they might need, some kind of antidote or protective equipment or devices or whatever, in the government stockpile so that they can protect the people who are, going into harm's way.
But wait, the PrEP Act doesn't even mention the military. It doesn't mention a specific group at all. And even so, I mean, you what? You're going to sacrifice your military and say, well, they can all
this is the point. There were negotiations for other versions of the PrEP Act, and in those other versions, which the late Senator Edward Kennedy submitted in February of that year. And in there, it makes it very clear that they were talking about, security measures where they would have all of these things in the biosecurity stockpile, vaccines or antidotes or equipment or whatever it might be. They've allocated over $3 billion a year.
$3 billion back then in 2000.
Well, now.
No. And okay, right. Well, that's still a ton of money.
And so the point is, this was originally meant to be limited in scope dealing with military and health personnel going into harm's way. But when COVID hit, it was expanded to the entire, country.
But you know what, James? The text of the PrEP Act doesn't bear that out, what you just said. Because
Exactly.
if that's what they wanted, they could have written it that way, and they did not. It's completely open-ended for everyone.
And when you read the replacement bill that Senator Kennedy had been working on, that's why they were so upset that this very vague languaged bill was slipped in place of what they were working on that arguably would have been more precise.
Oh, I see.
And
So they had been working on a text. They had been working on, and Ted Kennedy was somehow involved in this, I take it from, okay. So they had been working on a much more precise, targeted version of this. And then they substituted this completely vague language. I'm not even vague. I mean, it's not vague. It just says everyone. There's no vagueness there. Everybody, and he was
gives all power.
Right, and apparently he was surprised by that, so much so that he ended up voting for this horrible appropriation bill because of because there were other things in it that he liked. But then he went a month and a half later. He came back and said, "We have to repeal this act because that's not right. What happened there?" And maybe he wanted to substitute it with another version or so. I don't know.
Exactly.
Okay, that's what that was the intent then.
And so the Republicans were in control at the time, so that effort failed. And time marches forward, and it was used for various things in various limited scope. But the whole point of it really is to protect the manufacturers and anyone who administers these from the legal liability of harming someone else, because it wipes out all of the controls that people believe organizations or agencies like the FDA are, they're our watchdog, making sure that these products are safe and effective. But the PrEP Act makes it so that those things get kicked to the curb. If the secretary says that these are the products to be used, they could be experimental, they could be emergency use, they could be whatever. Anyone who follows his instructions cannot be sued.
Right. They can all. Yes, exactly. They can all inflict terrible damage on people. They can all inflict death on people, and it's totally fine. There's no recourse. Great. What a wonderful act. Exactly. So, but I wanted to ask you something. First of all, do you know which people worked on this PrEP Act? Which people are the ones who slipped in this vague language in the middle of the night?
I do not have the information as to who wrote the bill. That's maybe if someone does know that. Maybe
Catherine knows. Catherine Watts, so she might know who did that, because that's an interesting question. And then I also wanted to, it's like what's this expression? It's like a legal kill box.
Well, that's one of Catherine Watts' thing for the entire picture. Okay. And so really in this particular case, they refer to it as a poison pill that gets slipped in. You have to swallow the poison pill because the appropriations for the military.
Oh yeah, I understand that. No, I meant just a legal kill box. The PrEP Act is like a legal. It gives you.
It's a piece of the puzzle. There's so many other pieces of legislation that Catherine Watt has identified. This gives everyone involved a blanket of legal protection. Okay, the systems for, and I want to make this very clear. Whether it's mandates or issues dealing with informed consent or, any of the funding and all that sort of stuff, those are elsewhere, right? People get confused, and it's very simple. The PrEP Act is about liability protection. Both you can't be sued, and they're not liable for any of the harm. So let me expand on that just a little bit. This is not just about the COVID-19 vaccines. There's actually 9 issues involved that are currently, there are PrEP Act declarations that are current, okay? First on the list alphabetically is acute radiation syndrome. Think maybe if there was nuclear war, or maybe
okay. Maybe we can show this, because that's the list of the. And which document do you have that, James?
Well, it's on the homepage. You just got to scroll down. It's
okay. Let's just quickly do that.
repealtheprepact.com, and there's a lot of information here for people.
Okay, there we go.
This is designed to inform people, and so at the top there's a video that I encourage.
Okay, sorry.
This right there is a video that I encourage everyone to watch. There are other videos that I've done. If you scroll down a little bit more.
Okay.
Right. All right. There's additional videos and audios and so forth that I encourage people to watch. Okay. But if you scroll down a bunch, there's documents that are summaries, brochures that people can use, so forth and so on. But we were headed for the 9. Go ahead and scroll down a bunch. It's just above the actions to take. These are all things to make it easier for people to learn about the PrEP Act. It's even a little newspaper type thing. These are 8 ways that it's unconstitutional. And you're getting awfully close. A little bit down below these 45 reasons why it's violating the Constitution.
So this is, by the way, a great website that James put together here. It's chock full of information, and you can download documents that lead to even more information. And we are actually going to show you some of that, because it's not only informative, it's also really actionable. But we'll come to that.
Okay, here you go. Here we go. Okay. There's anthrax. They didn't do it exactly.
Okay, so that's interesting. So that was the first one, and that was October 1st. So that was almost 3 years later.
This is of the things that are current. Okay.
Yeah, but this is off. This is the effective date off, and it's still, so it has been current the entire time since 2008. Right. Correct?
And so they didn't do it alphabetically. Anthrax, acute radiation syndrome.
What is acute radiation syndrome?
If there was a nuclear explosion, if there was a dirty bomb, one might argue that we're all exposed to acute radiation with 5G and all the other electromagnetic fields. Botulinum, pandemic influenza, smallpox, and other.
Sorry, James, I have a question. For acute radiation, let's say I work in a radiation department as a tech or as a radiologist or something, and somehow some accident and I get an overdose of radiation somehow. So then I suffer from acute radiation syndrome, right? So does my treatment then is free of all liability? Or how does that work?
There's exactly that possibility. You have to get into all of the details and, see what the specific declaration says. And if the healthcare personnel, diagnosed you with something that's covered by the PrEP Act, and they did what was authorized, under that declaration, you're at, a difficult situation.
Interesting. Right. Okay. So now I'm really curious, actually, to read the entire PrEP Act declaration for SARS-CoV-2 and see what exactly is in there.
There are hundreds of pages to deal with.
Hundreds of pages? The declaration has hundreds of pages?
Overall, all of these documents amount to hundreds of pages. We're dealing with smallpox, right? Are we really, afraid of smallpox? Well, that includes what they call Mpox. I call it moneypox, right?
Well, what is that, monkeypox or what? Or what is Mpox?
Yeah, they changed the name. Yep.
Okay.
Ebola, and that has, I believe, been expanded to include Marburg. There's a lot of people grumbling about Marburg, being on the horizon, whatever. Zika, I think, is the one that, most people might be likely to bump into if you travel and get bit by a mosquito and your doctor does some cockamamie test and tells you that you've got Zika. There are protocols for that. The pandemic influenza, think about that, right? People get, quote unquote, diagnosed with influenza all the time.
Wait a minute, pandemic influenza. I mean, so that's just the flu.
They go into great detail in all of these things. The most interesting one to me, quite frankly, is nerve agents and certain insect. And I think I just misspoke. Marburg's down at the bottom there. Nerve agents and certain insecticides. what in the world are we talking about here? Now, I get nerve agents, some kind of weapon of war, but insecticides as being, potentially an emergency situation. Now, the whole point.
So what if I spray some, I don't know, I mean, I have no idea what that even means. Insecticides. If I spray some tick, I want to go into the woods and spray some of these tick insecticides on me.
The
I
the
mean,
point the point being, to not get lost in the weeds here, no pun intended, is that this is not just about COVID, and it's not just about injections or vaccines.
okay,
Okay.
sorry, I have to interrupt you. So pandemic influenza, I have to come back to this because now I don't know what it says in the fine print. All I can
Mhm.
read here is there is a PrEP Act declared. There's a PrEP Act declaration for pandemic influenza. And they changed the definition of pandemic. It doesn't mean anymore that it has to be really
Mhm.
severe and that lots of people have to die. So we have pandemics all the time, constantly, because people are sick with influenza around the world. A lot of people are sick with influenza around the world all the time. So depending on what's in the fine print, all the influenza, so the influenza vaccine shot, for example, is free of all liability. Is that what it possibly could mean?
All of these details are things that people need to realize, that this law has given a liability protection to almost, everybody involved in treating these problems. If you can scroll down just a little
Okay,
bit more.
I'll do that in a second. But there's one thing that I'm missing here, and that's avian flu.
um,
Why? I mean, I would think that by now they've been talking about avian flu for at least 20 years, longer, and it's not on here. Why haven't they declared it for avian flu yet?
I would have to dig into the pandemic influenza and look at all of the specific details. That's something we could maybe do off into the future. The point of letting people see this chart from the GAO, Government Accountability Office, is this is not just about COVID, but it explains the insanity that happened during COVID. And so maybe if we can have a
Yes,
discussion about what this is really all
right,
about.
right.
Um,
And I
the,
also want to point out, look at these dates. 2008. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 were declared in 2008. And is that correct, James? Were they uninterruptedly in effect since then until today, and supposedly going to end with 2027? Although I'm 99.9% sure they're going to be extended again based on this past history.
yeah, I mean, there have been claims made against swine flu in, I believe, 2009. And so, yes, the short answer is yes. And, most people are just
Wow.
completely unaware,
Yeah,
right?
of course. I mean, this is not like anybody reports on this or that people see this chart. So the GAO publishes it, and who does that mean that anybody sees it except a tiny number of people? Okay, but
That's
sorry. It's
yeah.
just I find this so unsettling and incredible that yeah, I had to interrupt you there. So let's scroll down to
Okay.
where do you want me to
So
scroll to?
I've written, for people who really want to know, right? You went too far.
Sorry.
I've written a book that has all of the details about all of those things for people who want to know. Okay. But the whole point of what I'm doing
Is that this
is,
one here, Repeal the PrEP
yeah,
Act?
yes,
And I think I have it. I think I have it here. Is that it? Is that
that
your?
is,
That's
that
it.
is.
Okay, so you can
And,
download it and then you can read it in your browser. Repeal the
yep.
PrEP Act, and there's a nice table of contents here. Let me see. I haven't read it. Let's see how 81 pages, and that gives you a good overview of the whole thing, correct?
Yeah, and this is version, I think it was 2.0. You went by it real quick. There's version 3 that I'm waiting for one link to get from somebody,
Oh,
and
nice. So you
new
updated.
version 3 will be coming up very soon.
Oh, this is nice. I'm going to add a link below the interview.
Sure.
So let's go back to this one here. Okay.
Okay. And so the whole point of this is, it is within our power as people to take action. Many people, say, okay, once you've learned about this, and I encourage people, read the document, watch the videos, let some of this seep into your awareness. Being unaware is dangerous, right? This has been in our world for almost 20 years. And if you can recognize that this is one of the many reasons why they pushed the fraudulent PCR tests, if they could get a diagnosis of COVID by whatever means necessary, then if they did what the government told them to do, they were covered. And that is what drove the insanity. They were not covered to give people things that actually helped. And this falls under learn. Okay, so people need to understand what this law actually did and the incentives that it gave people. Now, it didn't give any mandates. This is not about mandates. It did not direct any money to hospitals. That's the CARES Act. Don't get these things all confused. It's not the 1986 Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. It's worse because it goes beyond just vaccines. It included the use of ventilators and remdesivir and drugs like Paxlovid and molnupiravir and whatever hospital protocols were specified. They knew that if they got people, I've heard people had to take 10, PCR tests, which are not tests. And once they got the diagnosis of COVID, they knew that they were covered. All these other, the CARES Act would bring them money, but they could not be sued as long as they did what the secretary had labeled as covered countermeasures.
Right. So
If they were,
I have a question
if,
there. There's something that I don't understand clearly about the covered countermeasures. Is it correct that the PrEP Act has to be declared for a specific covered countermeasure, like remdesivir or like the ventilators? So they are specified in these amendments, I guess, or how does it work? Okay, so but that's interesting. So it has to be the covered countermeasure has to be specified under the PrEP Act, or has to be declared. Do they use the word declared for that as well? Okay, good. So that yeah, because that then means even if there is no mandate, look, even if it's not mandated, I mean, there was no mandate to use remdesivir, right? But it still didn't protect anyone because people who went to the hospital, even people who explicitly said, I don't want to be put on a ventilator. I don't want to get remdesivir. Even these people often received the remdesivir and were put on the ventilator and died. And it was all despite the fact that it was against their explicit wish. They were subjected to these covered countermeasures, and they have no way of suing anybody because it's covered now under the PrEP Act. I just want to make that clear because there are many law cases now where you think, well, of course they must win these lawsuits, and they don't. Where even children were against the will of the parents vaxxed against COVID, and although the school knew that the parents didn't want the child to get the vaccine, and they sued, and most of the judges have said, yeah, that's totally fine because of the PrEP Act.
let's go and open up the PrEP Act again and
Okay.
go down to section I, which is definitions. It's very near the bottom. Okay, so covered countermeasures, and scroll down to the next page. Right. And so, what this is talking about is it's essentially corruption fueling the purchase of pharmaceutical products. Okay. Now let's scroll down to C. A covered countermeasure is either a drug, a biological product, a device. And so what we're dealing with here is it's only pharmaceutical products. It can't be some herb or homeopathic remedy or vitamin or mineral or other kind of therapy or treatment. This is clearly written in support of the pharmaceutical industry. And if you go down a little further and look at covered persons, right, the entire United States government is covered, right? The United States.
Wait,
So
what does that mean? The
it means
United
that
States, as the United States is not a person.
no, in law, a person is all kinds of different entities. It's
Okay.
corporations and everything else under the sun. So it's a manufacturer, a distributor, a program planner, a qualified person, or any agent working for them.
Mhm.
Now, in the declarations and the amendments, they have added crazy things to this. They have covered pharmacies and pharmacists and pharmaceutical technicians who did the injections. They even covered medical professionals whose license had expired up until 5 years prior. Okay?
Wow.
Now, if I can get you to go up a little bit,
but I want to scroll back up to see where were the definitions here.
just a little bit above.
Because you said that, it's clearly, you can clearly see that the pharmaceutical industry will profit from this, but I do not believe that this is all somehow cooked up by the pharmaceutical industry because, they are powerful, of course, and they have lots of money apparently all Congress men and women are being targeted by them and probably receive money, almost all of them, from them. They are not that powerful to push through a horrific bill like that actually invalidates basic civil rights and the Constitution. So
I can respectfully disagree with you. They most certainly are that powerful, and it's already happened.
But we know in the meantime that there is a whole other aspect to this whole PrEP Act thing, and that's the involvement of the military. So that
if you go up to where it's red, and this is something that you had asked me about earlier. Now, they use a term, qualified pandemic or epidemic product. They have that down below. It's a subcategory of covered countermeasures. But they also talk about security countermeasures. Now, if you click on the U.S. Code House link a little bit down below, that should get you there. Okay. This is about the strategic national stockpile. Now, I believe if you go all the way to the bottom on this link, that's where the punchline is. Just go all the way to the very, very bottom. Bottom line is, this is how they fund the stockpile for all of the covered countermeasures to the tune of $3.5 billion a year. You're not allowed to ask what security countermeasures are in the stockpile. This is a gigantic slush fund for the Secretary of Health and Human Services to say, there might be an emergency at some point in the future, and here's the products that we're going to put in the stockpile. Here are the contracts to facilitate that, and the money flows to all of the pharmaceutical industry. I do disagree with you respectfully. There's every reason in the world for Big Pharma to have pushed through these, many, many pieces of legislation, because it's $1 billion boondoggle.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, there are all sorts of industries in the United States that are extremely powerful and that would be happy to get some sort of nefarious bill passed that gives them huge amounts of money, and that certainly hasn't happened. So. And plus, since we know so much more now about the involvement of the military in all of this, and I think from my point of view, what I think happened is that the pharmaceutical industry is just along for the ride, and because which is terrible enough, but that they are not the originators of what is happening here.
Well,
But I mean, it doesn't really matter. I think you can we
well,
can
I
we can
think
we can disagree on it, but the law that is the law that we are looking at, that is the problem that we are discussing, and that is the one that needs to be repealed.
yes. Well, many laws need to be repealed, and you mentioned Catherine Watt, and she's done an enormous amount of work to document essentially how the pharmaceutical industry, the public health agencies, the regulatory agencies, and the Defense Department and the national security, agenda have all merged together into something that has made and just made a mockery of the idea of what you actually do to maintain, optimize, and regain your health. And so, what we're dealing with here is not health policy. We're not dealing with any openness to determine what is best for an individual person who's dealing with some kind of a health issue. We're dealing with a top-down, organized effort fueling the use of pharmaceuticals, drugs, and devices and biologicals under the control of the Defense Department, the National Security Council, Homeland Security, and a little bit off on the side as just the one who makes it all happen is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who no court can question. And so if you could go back to
Right.
the
So
main.
yes, before we do that, so let me ask you this. Since the Secretary of Health plays, I'm going to stop sharing. Since the Secretary of Health plays such a crucial role in all this, explain to me why RFK hasn't ended the
Oh,
declaration for the
he's
PrEP
going to have
Act.
to explain that to you himself. There are many things that he can and should do. I wrote an open letter to RFK back on March 2nd. People can go to notsafeandnoteffective.com and read the open letter to Donald Trump. Let me warn you, it will knock your socks off. And there's an open letter to RFK. I kid you not. But the point is, Donald Trump cannot repeal the PrEP Act. He can and should have already submitted the 13th Amendment to the COVID declaration under the PrEP Act and wind it all down and take away the liability. But that is like picking the dandelion, the yellow flower out of your yard. If you don't dig out the root, it's just going to come back. What about Zika and botulinum and anthrax and all these others?
Yes. Yeah. I totally agree. I was just pointing out that now that we have, since the so in other words, what you're saying is, I like this image with picking out the dandelions. So he could have picked out all these dandelions, Zika, the Zika declaration, the COVID declaration, the Marburg declaration, this anthrax declarations, all the other declarations. He could have picked them all out on day one. And he hasn't done that. And that's very interesting, I think. And I think there are probably very good reasons for it, because if I have any understanding of RFK, that's the one thing that he would love to do, and he's not doing it.
So if I can frame this and express my opinion about the overall situation, okay, the ideal, perfect situation, if you could go back to the website, repealtheprepact.com, and scroll up a little bit from where you probably left off to where you see the 8 ways that the PrEP Act violates the Constitution. Okay. A law group, a lawyer, or even somebody pro se would petition the Supreme Court and say, we have a situation here that needs to be addressed, whether it comes through a court case that finds its way through the court system or some kind of direct, action. The PrEP Act is so abundantly in violation of the Constitution, and it so abundantly violates at least 5, maybe more, but certainly 5 of the rights that are, guaranteed and protected by the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, it should be struck down in its entirety. And so in my dream world, a court case finds its way in front of the Supreme Court, and the justices, come to their senses, and there's a 9-0 decision, and the entire PrEP Act is struck down. It's as if it never existed. All of those immunities and protections go away, and people can sue for the damages, that they rightfully have under the Seventh Amendment right to a trial by jury, take to court whoever it was that harmed them or their loved ones. I'm not going to hold my breath for the Supreme Court to see, and hear that case.
Well, what has there been has there been a single case since 2020, since this declaration of the PrEP Act for COVID-19? Has there been a single one?
If I finish your sentence and give it a little bit more detail, there have been certainly well over 100 cases that have been brought. And the general way it all goes down is someone, maybe their loved one died in the hospital, or they had some other kind of injury, or maybe it was the person who survived it. They find a lawyer. Most lawyers say, don't bother. You're just going to hit a brick wall called the PrEP Act. But some people thought they had extenuating circumstances, and their lawyers thought that they might have a case. So they bring it on a district, level. They file the complaint, and the defense puts forth a motion to dismiss the case. And they say, PrEP Act, we're a covered person, right? And the judge goes, oh, the PrEP Act says in Section 7, no court shall have jurisdiction.
Has there been a single case brought, not litigating on behalf of someone who was harmed? Because that is, then you can say, well, there's this PrEP Act. But you can, a case that actually challenges the constitutionality of the PrEP Act itself and say this law is unconstitutional and shouldn't exist.
There are some cases. Aaron Siri has, I think, at least 2 cases that are arguing for the harms that were caused. And there are snippets of issues dealing with the unconstitutionality of it. That information is incorporated into the 8 Ways document. Jeff Childers has a court case in Florida that has additional arguments saying that it's unconstitutional. The concern is that unless there is a full-bodied take down the entire PrEP Act, it's likely to only nip away at one or the other aspects of the PrEP Act. And so what I encourage people to do is to understand that as citizens, as Americans, whatever name you want to give yourself, as men and women who live in the 50 states in the United States, our rights are violated by the PrEP Act. The Constitution is violated by the PrEP Act.
Yes, I think everybody will understand. Everybody who even looks at, who just listens to our conversation will understand that without problem.
The Bill of Rights and the Constitution do not protect you from a violation of your rights. They just declare what your rights are. When your rights are violated, you have to stand up and defend them. The Bill of Rights is just a piece of parchment. It lays out the guideline. But when you see that your rights are clearly violated by a law that was snuck in, I say by the pharmaceutical lobby, but the Defense Department and everything else, if you don't speak up, if you just sit back,
well, yes, then they're going to kill you. Then they're going to kill you. Yes, they might very well kill you. But James, you are so right. What you said is so right, because I think especially Americans, they're so used, probably not anymore, but let's go back 9 years, 10 years, maybe just 6 years to 2019. They were so used to having inalienable rights. right? Oh, we have inalienable rights. Nothing can happen to us. And that is just, sorry, but it's foolish, because I'm convinced there are no inalienable rights. It's wishful thinking. We all want to have inalienable rights. Yes, we all want to have these rights. We want to have the right to life. We want to have the right to free speech. We want to have the right to free movement, and other things. But are we born with them? Are they somehow part of us? No, they're not. We have to fight for them. We have to be absolutely vigilant and fight for them. And they can be taken from us at any moment, from one moment to the next. And I think it was a real shock. I mean, I'm from Germany, so I know that we have no inalienable rights. And well, I guess, I don't know. I guess many people do. Even
I would like to rephrase that,
yeah,
in my own language, and we can certainly discuss it. Every nation, every whatever body you're talking about, whether it's one of the 50 states, because every state has their own constitution, the federal government has its own constitution. Many of them express what is essentially a social contract that applies in that jurisdiction, where the people have agreed that in a Republican form of government, these rights must be respected. Now, the parchment that's written on, or the
it's just
digital
paper.
file, it's just paper.
It's just paper. It cannot fight for you. It cannot do anything. I mean,
Exactly.
what's so interesting is that these inalienable rights, COVID exposed them as alienable. They can be, which means they are not part of you or something. They can be taken away. So if you want to have rights, if you really want to have civil rights, you happen to have some, you better watch out, because you can lose them any day, any second, really. And if you don't have them, you have to fight for them. But you can never, ever take them for granted, because even if you do have a right, it's only there because you are probably constantly fighting for it, and you're constantly vigilant. And that is something so important to understand. I mean, it would be nice, it would be wonderful if rights were really inalienable. Then we can just not worry about it, right? Why would we have to worry if it's inalienable? But it's not. They're not. They are alienable rights. And if we want to make sure that we have them, then we have to fight for them.
And so that leads us maybe to, what is it that people can, and I believe should, do at this point in time? Well, the starting point is to learn. And so if you can go back and scroll down on the main page where it says take action. All of the information that we're talking about, I've tried to make readily available on repealtheprepact.com. So this is maybe about a third of the way down on repealtheprepact.com. And there are more things that people can do. And if you scroll down just a little bit, step number 1 is to learn. Okay. People have no idea what we're talking about. They've never read the PrEP Act. They've never heard of it. Okay.
Well, you can learn it pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so above this point on the article.
So what happens when I click on it? Let me just click on it to see what happens then.
It's just going to scroll you down the page.
Oh, I see. Oh, nice. Okay. Right. So can I jump back?
Step
no.
number 1.
There we go.
Step number 1 is to learn. Scroll down a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's a petition that I'm circulating. People can go to repealtheprepact.org and sign the petition. But you have to understand that in the United States, there is no official way that a petition has lawful authority to command government to do something. This is all about lobbying and influence and conversation. So this is the petition. It's very simple and very straightforward. If you feel that it should be that this law is repealed, it's a very simple process. It's one page. It just says repeal the PrEP Act.
So this letter you would send to your Congress, to your congressman, your senator.
This is the petition version. If you scroll down to where it says full transparency, this petition is operating in a manner that is different than any petition you've ever seen. If you sign the petition, it asks, what is your state and congressional district? Because the person and persons that you should be discussing this information with are your congressional representative and your 2 senators. Now, if you want to open up the document, or maybe you have it open in another window.
Okay, and this shows how many. When did your website go live again? Was it a couple of days ago?
Saturday, May 3rd.
Okay,
And
so it
the
just went
petition,
live. It just went live,
yeah,
and you so far you collected 1,500 plus signatures, and from all
right.
50 states. Oh, you already got signatures from all 50 states, 88 of all congressional districts, 34 countries. So other countries, people in other countries can sign it too.
People in other countries are very much aware of this because they can't sue Pfizer in a U.S. court. Okay, they can't sue for the damages and all that. And, they have their own issues, but, they're voicing support around the
Actually,
world.
can they sue? So let's say somebody in France, can that person sue Pfizer in a French court?
That's going to be under French law. That's a whole nother story.
And I don't think that's the case because Sasha Latipova told me that in the EU, they signed predatory the states. So let's say France or Germany or Great Britain. They signed so-called predatory contracts with the pharmaceutical industry that strips that practically does what the PrEP Act does, because they don't have PrEP Act. So they did it via the contracts so that they do not have any liability for any side effects there either.
In one view, the PrEP Act is horrifically worse than what many other countries have. But in another view, it's a very clear target. In other countries, they've got something here and something there. There's hidden contracts. There's all these things that you don't know about. And so this is the petition. It's a very simple 1-page petition. And if you scroll down to the next page, there's 1 page that is the legislation that we, the people, need to demand that Congress pass. It's basically just 1 paragraph. And if you read the last words, is hereby repealed. It's this simple and straightforward. That law from almost 20 years ago needs to go away. It needs to be taken off the books. Now, the way this petition is operating that's different than any other petition is you can, at any point in time, see the latest version of all of the people who have signed the petition. You can see if your friends and neighbors know about this and have signed it because it's organized by state and by district.
Wait, where can I see that?
You're headed right into it.
Oh, okay.
If you start with Alabama, okay, there's information at the top of the page that everyone can use when they talk to their congressperson and senators. And this is information that is directly from VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. So there's 99 cases that were reported to VAERS in Alabama.
Okay, and we should say that the underreporting factor in VAERS is something between 30 and 100. So
it's certainly more. But if you scroll down just a little bit, and maybe we'll look at 1 or 2 of them. We're not going to read all 100. Stop right there. Okay. The person died on the same day as the vaccination, days after vaccination, 0. 49-year-old
female, Alabama, vaccinated. So she was
early on, January
very early.
15th, 2021. Scroll down just a tiny little bit.
So it was cardiac arrest. Does it say how many minutes?
Scroll down
how much?
Just a little bit. There's
Life?
Always a report. Okay.
Yeah.
Patient suffered a cardiac arrest and was unable to give details about her symptoms. Okay. She began seizing without warning and died of same day. Got injected and died.
Seizing, yeah, right,
Okay.
without warning.
Now,
so it was seizing was complicated by cardiac arrest. So it's not seizing and then the cardiac arrest of uncertain etiology.
If you've ever had a leg cramp,
yes.
Okay. Imagine if you have a heart cramp. Okay. Now people may scoff at that, but when muscles are uncontrollably, lock up, okay, many heart attacks are actually caused by that, not blockages of the arteries and things like that. The point being, there are thousands of reports that are documented. I'm pretty sure that the woman who died didn't file this report. Somebody had to do it on her behalf. So there's a witness to the, to
Does
the
it
death.
say? Does it say somehow who? It probably
They
was the
don't give
doc.
anybody's. They
It
don't give
probably was the
anybody's.
doctor because of the You look at this detailed medical information here that is
So
in here.
let's not get stuck in the
Yeah,
weeds here.
yeah,
There
yeah.
are thousands of reports, and the vast majority of Americans don't even know how to access them. So
Well,
if you go back,
VAERS is designed in such a way that it's really it's a very awkward system.
so if you
Sorry,
scroll down back to Alabama,
I have to
okay,
go back to
I've tried to
Alabama.
make it. I've done an enormous amount of work to make it so that in every state you can access the VAERS reports
Okay,
of
so
people.
you did this for all 50 states.
All 50 states. Now, the
Amazing.
Alabama Betrayal Project, Dossiers, if you click on that, this goes even deeper. See where it says click here, Alabama Betrayal Project? Down.
Yeah. I
Right?
was just marveling at, I mean, just to, I don't know how many hours, how many days you spent on this. Can you, weeks, months? I mean,
Couple of months. Yeah,
couple
couple of
of
months.
months. Wow. But
Okay.
this is wonderful because it's so easy to go in there and have a look at all this. All right. So Alabama Betrayal Project dossiers. Click here. So let's go in here.
So the group CHBMP, it'll pop up in a moment. It takes a little bit of time to load.
Well, that's
COVID-19.
an awful name. What does that stand for?
It's
CHBMP.
COVID-19 Humanity Betrayal Memory Project.
Oh my
If
God.
you scroll,
That's so hard to that's so hard to remember.
it's
Okay.
Champ. It's Champ with a B. CHBMP. Scroll down a little bit, and you'll see a bunch of files.
Oh, champ with a B, Alabama. Okay. Well, still think they could have had a better name. But anyway, so that's totally beside the point.
See all of the files, right? They have documented what you could loosely call hospital homicides. And so please understand that the PrEP Act is not just about the jabs. VAERS reports are just about the vaccines.
So does every state have a memorial, have a humanity betrayal memory project? Every single state?
If you notice at the top, it says al.chbmp.org.
Yep. Okay.
If you put the 2-digit code for any of the states.
Oh, I see. You can switch to okay.
Now, each one of these dossiers also has an hour-long interview with the surviving family members. And so if you're talking to your congressperson, if you're talking to your senator or one of their staff members, they are blissfully unaware of the amount of work that has gone into documenting all of this is astronomical. We're talking, just an unbelievable amount of work that have been done by the people in this group. We need to honor the fact that they've done all that work, to honor the fact that these people have been harmed and nobody seems to give a damn.
Let's have a look at this guy here. COVID hospital protocol killed my son. No, not this one. Let's go back. Let's just have a quick look into one of these dossiers. That's William Donald, age 40. So I'm clicking on it. Oh, it just takes a while to load. So he was 40 years old. Here we go.
Okay. And every one of these, if you scroll down a little bit on the right, has
a video. Oh, that's super early. 2nd of January. He was one of the early. So that's him. That's him. He looks so young.
Okay. Now,
look at this. Oh, look at this. My son was isolated from the outfit. We do not know what happened. They gave him remdesivir.
Yep. Please realize you jumped to a conclusion that it was 2021. These are primarily hospital protocol homicides. They're not necessarily.
Oh, I see. Yeah, right. Okay.
And so the issue is, yes, the PrEP Act is a law, and all of the facts about, VAERS statistics and all of that sort of stuff. But the end result is these people were abused in the hospital. They were treated horrifically. And when they went to try to get compensation, the PrEP Act makes it practically impossible. Out of all of the people who have submitted requests for compensation through the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program,
CICP, yes.
only 30 people in the entire country have actually received a monetary compensation for the harms that they are not allowed to sue for.
Yes, the entire program is a joke, actually. They have no money, and they string people along. They string them along for years and don't act. They probably have, I don't know how many employees they have. The whole program is a joke. I think that's pretty well known by now. But this poor guy, he got the death protocol. I mean, he was only 40 years old. They put him on remdesivir. He was on remdesivir for 5 days. They put him on a ventilator.
It's horrible.
He was placed on the ventilator on the 7th of January. He was 1 day on the ventilator together, and that killed him off really quickly. Wow. What a nice look. Look at him. Look at him. He looks such a nice guy. And there's his mom. The mom is the one who did the dossier. And then there's an interview, you said? Here.
Yeah, I think he just went past it. Yeah,
it's this one here, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, and then you can talk. Then you can listen to her. Who are the people who did these?
There's a world of people behind CHBMP. I encourage you to look through that.
It's great.
They've done over 900 hour-long interviews that are available from all the many different states.
Yes.
Let's back out of this, though.
All cases. Document. You can even document your story. So you can go in here and do your own story. All cases, home. Okay. Amazing. Okay, let's get out. Let's go back.
Okay. Now, this document is a living document as people sign the petition to say that they support passing legislation to repeal the PrEP Act. Their names will be added to this document. Yesterday, we went looking through it, and you found that you were listed under New York, I believe, District 17.
16. Okay? District 16, yeah. There are only 2 people in my district who have signed the petition. There's one other person who has signed it. Interesting.
There you go. And so if you scroll down, pick a state, any state, doesn't matter. The point is, what we need to do as we the people is get better organized. Here in Alabama, they have a number of different districts, okay? And we've already gotten people in 88% of all of the 435 districts and 50 states. The job is very straightforward. If you believe that the PrEP Act should be repealed, the path forward is to talk to your 2 senators and your 1 congressional representative and let them know that they are supposed to represent you, not the pharmaceutical lobby or not their donors or not some lobbyist or whatever it may be. What we need to do is get better organized along the geographical boundaries of each person's congressional district. And so what the petition seeks to do is to identify allies. And so we've already got 1,500 people in, just a short span of time. Obviously, we need millions of people to be aware of this. And we can back out of this.
No, I don't want to back out of it because this is great. Because look, let's say I live in Arizona. I can look at all this, get the information. I can listen to the projects. We look at these dossiers. But then you put all the information in there. So let's say I want to send an email to my senator here, Mark Kelly. I click on contact. I really like this because it makes it so easy. It makes it so easy for anyone to contact their senator, to contact their, here we go, scheduling. Here, you can just fill this in. You jump right to his website.
Yeah. If you scroll down on here, what I want people to understand.
You mean here or the other one?
Keep going.
Okay.
It should be down at the bottom. Well, he's a bad example. Let's pick another.
Okay, let's
Pick
go
another
back.
one.
But it's yeah.
Some senators and representatives make it very, very difficult. Others, there's an aspect of this that I want to show people.
Let's go
You
back
just click
to
on any one of them.
yeah. Okay, let's for example, Senator Lisa Murkowski. But if I want to go, if I all I have to know is which district am I in.
Sure,
Wait, there's only one district in Alaska?
that's correct.
Oh, wow. Interesting. They don't have many people there. Okay, so let's click on this. Nick Baggage. Baggage?
Okay.
Baggage?
Now they have a Fairbanks office and an Anchorage office. There's nothing that says you can't call the Washington office and the Fairbanks office and the Anchorage office. Send them all a letter. Send them all a leave a phone message or whatever you want to do.
You can call. Oh, by the way, I heard that handwritten letters, I mean, old-fashioned letters sent through the postal system do make an impression on Congress, Congress
There's a bit of
representatives.
a hierarchy. There's a bit of a hierarchy. Okay. Obviously, an in-person meeting is at the top of the list, face to face. You're
Right.
most likely
If you
not.
can get it.
Well, you can get it. You're most likely not going to speak directly to the congressperson or the senator, but you can set up an appointment with their staff. If you get a face-to-face meeting, generally that's ideal. Next down the line is
Oh,
the phone.
James, it's easy to find out the staff of any congressman, of any senator. People have to go to Bill Track 50, and there's a free version. And if you sign up for a free trial, you get access to everything. There's a 7-day free trial. You just sign up for the.
Beautiful.
I put it, yes, it's extremely useful. So I put it into the resource under the interview. So Bill Track 50, I think it's called. And then you just put in the name of, what's the name of this guy? Nick Baggage. And you get a tab for his staff. So you click on staff and you see his entire staff with telephone numbers and email addresses. And that's his current staff. And then you already know, you just send the email to exactly the right person. Or you can send it to the entire office, the same email, so that everybody gets it, because they have especially the senators, they have many employees, and the representatives have fewer. Okay.
So the priority is you can pay a visit and have a real conversation in person with somebody. Maybe next down the list is a phone call, and you can ask for them to set up a Zoom meeting, and they will do that. I've done that with congressional staffers, and the whole idea is, if you're a constituent, if you live in their district, it's their responsibility to hear you out. You're absolutely right. A handwritten letter goes a long way. People like to be able to push a button and send an automated email, but let me tell you, they pretty much ignore those. And by all means, you can do that, but think in your own life, right? Somebody knocks on your door and wants to sit down and talk to you. It gets your attention.
Yes.
If somebody sets up a Zoom meeting like we're doing right now, it's not Zoom, but you know what I'm talking about. You get their attention almost as good as being in person.
But I think even just leaving a voice message, if they get dozens and dozens of voice messages a day, that makes an impression. I mean, that's unusual. That doesn't usually happen.
Right. Imagine your response if you go and you check your mail, your physical mail, and there's a handwritten letter from a friend. Oh my God, it's a lost art, right?
Yes.
When you get now, the other thing is, what happens when you have the mail or post person knock on your door and they have a certified letter for you? Does that get your attention?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
So, if you send a certified letter and it's a handwritten letter to your congressperson, you're going to be way more likely to get their attention. Unfortunately, what most people are doing is just complaining. oh, my congressperson doesn't do what I want him to do. Well, how is your congressperson ever going to know what it is you want unless you
Yes.
directly address them?
Yeah,
Now,
that's a fair point. And also, I once talked to someone who is in local government or on it's in New York. I live in New York. So,
mhm,
and he told me, to my great surprise, because I said, I mean, what's the point of sending a letter to my congressman in New York? I know exactly what his political stance is, and he is on the exact opposite side, so it's not going to make any impression on him. And he said, no, that's actually wrong. And he told me that what he had observed himself while he was, I don't know, he was a
mhm,
staffer or something. He said that if let's say 30 emails come in on one day pertaining to a specific subject or issue, that is
mhm,
such an unusual event. I mean, it's just 30 people, and many activist groups know how to use this, right? Because
mhm, mhm.
30 people out of, I don't know, a million or several million in some district, that's not many.
Well, every
But
district roughly has about 3/4 of a million people.
well, my district, oh, okay, fine. But anyway, so he said just a relatively small number. And he said he has seen the guy he worked for get really nervous just because of the 30 emails. I thought, oh, how very interesting. So
Yeah.
it does make a difference, apparently.
If you woke up in the morning, okay, and you got 30 certified letters in the mail,
I hope
would
not.
that get your attention? If
Absolutely.
if you woke up in the morning and you got one email from somebody, I mean, think about it. We go through emails so quickly because we get so many.
But even emails, if it's enough, and if it's all going in the same direction, even that makes an impression on them because
What
it's
if
unusual.
what if you got 30 phone calls? What if you
Mhm.
got 30 text messages? What if you got 30, the point is we the people have to get better organized with one voice. And I think that this particular issue, it's not a Democratic issue, it's not a Republican issue, it's everybody. This is a violation of our Constitution. It's a violation of our fundamental rights. It is crystal clear. And the system of government that we have requires us to take the responsibility to let our representatives know, and our senators, what it is we want them to do. Now, the task will take them about 5 minutes. The bill is already written. All they would have to do is tell their legislative assistant, hey, look this over, check it over, and submit it to the Senate or the Congress for consideration. Sign me on as the sponsor or the co-sponsor. That's all we're asking them to do.
Right.
Well,
And they can just use I mean, you can use the petition as the letter, or maybe change it a little bit, but you can basically use the document that you have here among all your information as the template, correct?
exactly. And
Okay. Okay.
ideally, you connect with someone who has suffered enormously because of the PrEP Act. And when you bring that emotional reality of the suffering that this bill has caused and have that conversation with a representative, it has a much bigger impact.